The thing about an orbital megaprison is that it sounds a lot more impressive than it feels when you're stuck neck-deep in its guts, especially when you're Warden Luriel, and your day starts with an alarm blaring like a banshee with a megaphone fetish. Luriel, you lazy bastard, get your sorry ass up. The AI voice grated through the calm, somehow managing to sound both robotic and exasperated. Luriel groaned, rolling out of bed with all the enthusiasm of a cat facing a bath. I swear, if I ever get my hands on whoever programmed you, I'm putting them in solitary. The AI chirped, thoroughly unimpressed with Luriel's threats. Warden, you have a priority alert from Section 13. Unauthorized activity detected. Of course, Luriel muttered, pulling on his uniform. Why can't we ever have an unauthorized tea party or something? He trudged down to Section 13, where the faint smell of ozone mixed with desperation hung in the recycled air. Lights flickered ominously, because apparently even advanced technology isn't immune to dramatic timing. As the doors hissed open, Luriel was greeted by a scene that would make a conspiracy theorist weep with joy. Rows of tanks lined the walls, each one holding a slumbering figure like a macabre collection of oversized action figures. Well, shit, Luriel said, because sometimes eloquence is overrated. Beside him, Technician Jax was fiddling with a control panel, his fingers moving like a caffeinated spider. Looks like someone's been playing God, Jax said, glancing up with a grin that was more wolf than technician. And here I thought we were just babysitting the galaxy's most delightful sociopaths, Luriel replied, stepping closer to the tanks. What are we looking at, Jax? Jax shrugged, the kind of shrug that said, I don't get paid enough for this shit. Cloning, obviously. Unauthorized, illegal, and probably malicious. But my next paycheck, this is why we've been having power fluctuations. Clones, Luriel repeated, tapping on the glass of one of the tanks. Because why settle for one miserable existence when you can copy and paste it? Before Jax could answer, the comm system crackled to life, a voice as smooth as an oil spill slithering through. Attention, Earth. This is the Galactic Council. We are enacting sanctions due to unauthorized cloning operations discovered within your jurisdiction. Consider this a cosmic slap on the wrist. Luriel laughed, a harsh, humorless bark. Sanctions, huh? Well, isn't that just peachy? I suppose this means our intergalactic Yelp rating is about to tank. Jax snorted, shaking his head. Nothing like a little clone scandal to ruin your day. Luriel leaned against the wall, staring at the tanks. What do you think they were planning to do with these? Start a new colony of annoying neighbors. Whatever it is, it ain't good, Jax said, his face grim. And with the council breathing down our necks, we're in for a rough ride. Nothing like a little galactic crisis to spice up the work week, Luriel quipped, scratching his chin thoughtfully. We need to get to the bottom of this before we're all up shit creek without a paddle. Jax nodded, shutting down the cloning equipment with a few swift keystrokes. I'll see what I can dig up on who might be behind this. Good, Luriel said, casting one last look at the eerily still figures in the tanks. Let's hope we can stop this before it gets any worse. Back in his office, Luriel stared at his terminal, the Galactic Council's announcement looping on every channel. Sanctions meant less resources, tighter scrutiny, and more headaches. Just what every warden dreams of. His thoughts were interrupted by a notification on his screen. It was a report from the surface, outlining the sanctions' immediate impact. Earth's trade routes were cut, supplies dwindling before they even began. Well, folks, looks like we're back to eating recycled protein bars, Luriel muttered, already dreading the taste. As the day dragged on, Luriel's office felt more like a pressure cooker. Every officer, technician, and janitor on the station seemed to have a question, and most of them were some variation of, "What the hell do we do now?" "We keep calm and carry on," Luriel said for the umpteenth time, though he secretly wanted to say something more like, "We panic and flail wildly." But leadership has its burdens. In the break room, Luriel found Officer Cade, a lanky man with a penchant for stating the obvious. "So, cloning, huh? Can't say I saw that coming, Cade said, sipping what passed for coffee in this part of the galaxy. You and me both, Luriel replied, grabbing a cup and hoping it wouldn't dissolve his insides. I was betting on some good old-fashioned smuggling. Cade chuckled, a sound like gravel in a blender. Guess they decided to skip the warm-up crimes and go straight to the grand finale. Luriel shrugged, staring into his cup as if it held the answers to life, the universe, and everything. Gotta admire the ambition, if nothing else. The doors whooshed open, admitting Officer Rivat, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and dread. "Boss, you need to see this," she said, holding out a datapad. "What now?" "More bad news?" Luriel asked, already bracing for impact. Rivat handed over the datapad. "Footage from the cloning lab. Looks like we found our mastermind." On the screen, a shadowy figure moved among the tanks, tapping controls with the confidence of someone who believed they were untouchable. Luriel squinted, trying to make out any features. Well, the plot thickens." Rivat nodded, her expression grim. "And it gets better. I've got a hunch this isn't just some rogue scientist." "Of course not," Luriel sighed. "Why go small when you can have a galaxy-spanning conspiracy?" Back in the control room, Luriel and his team pored over the footage, piecing together what they could. "We need to figure out who this is and how deep this rabbit hole goes," Luriel said, rubbing his temples. Jax leaned over, pointing at a timestamp on the footage. "Notice the badge. Looks like one of Ior's." Luriel felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Great. A mole, just what we need." As the Iors ticked by, the team worked relentlessly, their banter growing more sardonic as exhaustion set in. "You know, I always thought I'd end up saving the galaxy," Jax joked, his eyes bleary from staring at screens. "Turns out I'm just trying to save my own ass," Luriel chuckled, though it lacked humor. "Aren't we all, Jax, aren't we all?" Finally, as the clock ticked into the early hours of the morning, they had a name. "Dr. Fenwick," Rivat announced, holding up a personnel file. "Our very own Dr. Frankenstein." Luriel scanned the file, eyes narrowing. "Figures." "He always did seem a bit too interested in pushing boundaries," Jax snorted. "Guess it's up to us to push back." With a plan forming, Luriel addressed the team. "All right, people. We know who it is, and we know where he likes to play mad scientist. Let's wrap this up before the council decides to turn us into a cautionary tale." The team dispersed, each one preparing for the confrontation to come. As Luriel watched them go, he couldn't help but feel a reluctant sense of pride. They were a ragtag bunch, but they were his. Later, alone in his office, Luriel stared out at the stars, wondering how many other secrets they held. "Just another day in paradise," he muttered, knowing full well that paradise was a relative term. And as the lights flickered one last time, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Because in space, there's always another secret, another scandal, waiting in the dark. The orbital megaprison felt like it was on the verge of imploding. Sanctions had a funny way of turning a bad day into a parade of worse ones, and Warden Luriel was the honorary Grand Marshal. His office was a mess of crumpled reports and cold coffee cups, the remnants of long nights filled with more questions than answers. "All right, AI, give me something good," he muttered, knowing full well the AI definition of good often translated to not immediately catastrophic. "Good morning, Warden," the AI chirped, its perky tone a stark contrast to Luriel's perpetual state of half-consciousness. "Prisoner Cadden Sable has requested an audience. Claims he has information pertinent to your current predicament." "Cadden Sable," Luriel squinted at the screen, trying to place the name. "Isn't he the guy who tried to sell the moon or something?" "Correct. Though, to be fair, his marketing materials were quite convincing." Luriel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, let's see what Mr. Real Estate has to say." The trip to the holding cells was a corridor of flickering lights, and the occasional guard looking at him like he was the last piece of chocolate in a room full of sugar addicts. The guards, usually a disinterested bunch, were on edge, their loyalty a fragile thing in the wake of Galactic Council interference. Cadden Sable was sprawled on the bench of his cell, an easy smirk on his face that suggested he either knew something or was just really good at pretending. "Warden Lurail," he drawled as Lurail approached. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "You're the one asking for face time," Lurail shot back, crossing his arms. "What do you know about these sanctions?" Cadden leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a mix of mischief and something darker. "I've got a way to stop them." Lurail raised an eyebrow. "And what, pray tell, would a professional man know about intergalactic politics? Or did you plan on selling them a bridge to nowhere?" Cadden chuckled, a low, calculated sound. "Oh, Warden, when you're as good as I am, you get to know a lot of interesting people. Some of them owe me favors. Favors that could persuade the council to look the other way." "Favors?" Lurail repeated, skepticism dripping from the word. "And what do you want in return? A shuttle to the Bahamas?" "Nah, too cliché," Cadden said, his grin widening. "Just a little more freedom around here. Maybe a nicer cell, less of that delightful recycled air." Lurail considered it, weighing Cadden's offer like a bomb with an unclear timer. "All right, Sable, you help me out of this mess and I'll see what strings I can pull, but if this is a trick—" "It's not," Cadden interjected smoothly. "I deliver, you deliver. Simple as that." "Fine," Lurail said, turning on his heel. "But know this, Cadden. If you're playing games, I'll make sure this cell feels like a five-star hotel compared to where you'll end up." As Lurail returned to his office, he passed Technician Jax in the hallway, who was hunched over a bundle of wires like a mother hen with a brood of particularly unruly chicks. "Hey, Jax," Lurail called out. "Ever heard of a guy named Cadden Sable?" Jax looked up, oil smudged across his cheek. "Oh yeah, the moon salesman. What's he peddling this time? Asteroid insurance?" "Apparently, favors with the Galactic Council," Lurail replied, not bothering to hide his skepticism. Jack snorted, shoving a wire back into place with a bit more force than necessary. "Hope you got a receipt for those." A new alarm blared, this one sounding particularly gleeful about ruining Lurail's day. "Unauthorized personnel in Docking Bay 5, the AI announced, a touch too enthusiastically for Lurail's taste. "Because there's no such thing as a quiet day," Lurail muttered, heading for the bay. The docking bay was a chaos of flashing lights and guards scurrying about like they were auditioning for a disaster film. In the center stood a group of figures in sleek uniforms, exuding the kind of authority that usually came with a "do not mess with" label. "Lovely," Lurail said, approaching the leader. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this little surprise visit?" The leader, a woman with a severe haircut and a smile sharp enough to cut metal, inclined her head. "Warden Lurail. I'm Lieutenant Voss, Galactic Council Special Unit. We're here to ensure compliance with the sanctions." "Compliance," Lurail echoed. "What a fun word. I assume that means you'll be going through my sock drawer next." Voss didn't smile, but there was a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "Only if you have something to hide." Lurail let out a long-suffering sigh. "Well, make yourselves at home. Just don't redecorate." As the council representatives began their inspection, Lurail pulled Jax aside. "Keep an eye on them," he whispered. "I don't trust their smiles." Jax nodded, a grim expression on his face. "Too many teeth, if you ask me." Back in his office, Lurail checked his terminal, half expecting more bad news. Instead, a message blinked on the screen marked urgent. It was from Cadden. "Got a lead. Meet me in the rec room at 1800. Lurail almost laughed. The rec room was about as recreational as a tax audit, but at least it was out of the council's prying eyes. He made his way there, nodding to a few guards who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Cadden was waiting, lounging on a tattered sofa with the air of someone who owned the place. "Warden," he greeted lazily. "Glad you could make it. Cut to the chase, Sable. What's this lead?" Cadden leaned forward, dropping the casual act. "I know a merchant who can provide us with a clean slate, for a price, of course." "And what's this merchant's deal?" "Sell stars by the dozen." "Close," Cadden replied, his smile a ghost. "But he's got connections, real ones. Enough to make the council forget we ever existed." Lurail considered it, the weight of the situation pressing down like a vice. And how do you plan on contacting this mysterious benefactor? Cadden produced a small device, sleek and unassuming. With this, it's a burner, untraceable. I just need a quiet spot to make the call. All right, Luriel said, crossing his arms. But remember, if this is some elaborate scam. It's not, Cadden said again, that same certainty in his voice. Luriel nodded curtly. Let's hope you're right. As they left the rec room, they nearly collided with Officer Rivas, who looked like she'd just run a marathon. Warden, she panted, holding up a data pad. There's something you need to see. Luriel took the pad, his eyes scanning the contents. A list of transactions, each one damning in its implications. This is comprehensive, all tied to Dr. Fenwick, Rivas confirmed, her expression grim. Well, isn't that just the cherry on this disaster sundae? Luriel muttered. Looks like our favorite mad scientist was busier than we thought. Rivas nodded, an edge of frustration in her eyes. And with the council breathing down our necks. Yeah, I know, Luriel cut in. Time's not on our side. He turned to Cadden, who was watching with a sort of detached interest. Think your merchant friend can help with this? Cadden shrugged. Depends on how much you're willing to pay. Let's make that call, Luriel decided, leading the way to a comm station tucked away from prying eyes. And hope we're not too late. As they set up the call, Jax joined them, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. You sure about this, boss? No, Luriel admitted. But it's the best shot we've got. Cadden punched in a number, the line crackling with static before a voice answered, smooth and indifferent. Cadden, I was wondering when you'd call. Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises, Cadden replied, his tone casual. Got a job for you, the usual rates. There was a pause, the kind that stretched with unspoken implications. Consider it done. Just remember, I don't do refunds. Wouldn't dream of it, Cadden said, ending the call with a flick of his wrist. Luriel exhaled, tension coiled in his shoulders. Now what? Now, Cadden replied, settling back with his usual nonchalance. We wait. The waiting was the hardest part, a slow crawl of minutes ticking by with all the urgency of a snail on sedatives. Luriel paced, the walls feeling more like a cage with each passing second. Finally, the AI voice broke the silence, startling them all. Incoming transmission from the Galactic Council. Play it, Luriel ordered, bracing for impact. The screen flickered to life, revealing the stern visage of a council representative. Warden Luriel, the figure intoned, their expression unreadable. After reviewing your recent activities, the council has decided to lift the sanctions. For now. Luriel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Well, that's a relief. I was running out of witty comebacks. The representative's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. I trust you will ensure no further infractions occur. Absolutely, Luriel assured, his voice smooth. We'll be the model of intergalactic lawfulness. The transmission ended, leaving the room in an almost tangible silence. Jax was the first to speak, his tone a mix of disbelief and relief. Did that just happen? Looks like it, Luriel replied, rubbing the back of his neck. I won't pretend to understand how, but I'm not complaining. Cadden stood, stretching languidly. Well, Warden, looks like our business is concluded for now. Luriel snorted, exhaustion creeping in despite the victory. Don't get too comfortable, Sable. I'll be keeping an eye on you. Cadden's grin was all teeth. Wouldn't have it any other way. As Luriel left the room, he couldn't help but feel a reluctant appreciation for the enigmatic prisoner. Cadden might be a conman, but today he'd been the right conman. Back in his office, Luriel sat at his terminal, the stars outside a silent witness. The crisis had been averted for now, but the shadows lingered, whispering of more to come. Just another day in the orbital mega-prison, where secrets were currency and trust was a luxury few could afford. But for the moment it was enough. Luriel sat at his desk, staring at the ominous blinking cursor on his terminal like it had personally insulted him. He was up to his ears in paperwork, yet another delightful consequence of the council's visit. He pulled out a crumpled energy bar from his drawer, took one bite, and regretted it instantly. It tasted like despair, and cardboard had an unfortunate child. The door whooshed open to reveal Technician Jax, looking as bedraggled as ever. Warden, you might want to see this, he said, holding up a holopad that was as scratched and battered as a veteran of a dozen wars. "Please tell me it's not another mess," Luriel groaned, feeling the headache of impending doom settling behind his eyes. "Oh, it's a mess all right," Jax replied with a grin that spoke of schadenfreude. "But this one's special." "Special how? Does it come with fireworks and celebratory drinks?" Luriel asked as he grabbed the pad. "Try treachery and potential prison riots." "The festive kind," Jax answered, leaning against the wall with the kind of nonchalance that only came from a man who had given up on good days years ago. Luriel scrolled through the data, his eyes widening with each new revelation. "Son of a," he started, trying to find words that matched the magnitude of the betrayal unfolding on the screen. "Would you look at that, Jax? We've got ourselves a homegrown conspiracy." "Not just any conspiracy," Jax added, crossing his arms. "This one's tied to the Council." Apparently the cloning operation wasn't just some mad scientist's pet project. "It's got official backing." "Of course it does," Luriel muttered. "Because why stop at illegal cloning when you can add political intrigue to the mix?" Cadden Sable wandered into the room, timing as impeccable as ever. "Did I hear something about political intrigue, or are you planning my next court date?" Luriel waved the holopad at him. "Turns out your little cloning operation has friends in high places." Cadden raised an eyebrow, sauntering over with the grace of a man who thrived in chaos. "Friends? I knew I was popular, but this is a bit much. More like enemies who haven't decided if they want to stab us in the back or the front." "Efficient, really," Jax added, his humor as dry as the air recycled through the prison's vents. Luriel dropped into his chair, the weight of the situation pressing down like a starship's mass on a flimsy landing pad. "So, Cadden, I assume you've got a grand plan up your sleeve for dealing with this." Cadden leaned against the desk, his grin not wavering. "I always have a plan. Sometimes it even works." "That's reassuring," Jax said as he scratched the back of his neck, leaving a smudge of grease. "So, what's the move?" "We can't exactly waltz into the Council and demand they stop their secret faction." "No, but we can gather evidence," Cadden suggested. "Something concrete enough that even the Council can't ignore it." Luriel sighed, rubbing his temples. "And in the meantime, we just have to keep this place from going full Lord of the Flies." Cadden's expression turned thoughtful, a rare moment where the command's mask slipped ever so slightly. "You know, for a place designed to contain chaos, it's surprisingly easy for chaos to break out." "That's because chaos is the standard operating procedure around here," Jax said with a shrug. Luriel shook his head. "All right, Jax, I need you to dig deeper into the system. Find any hidden communications, suspicious transactions, anything that screams we're up to no good." "Consider it done," Jax replied, already moving towards the door with an urgency he usually reserved for lunch breaks. "And you," Luriel said, pointing at Cadden, "keep your ears open. I suspect you've got your own network in here." Cadden gave a mock salute. "I'll let you know if I hear anything beyond the usual gossip about who's been spiking the nutrient paste." "Great," Luriel said, rolling his eyes, "because that's exactly the kind of intel we need." With that, Cadden slipped out of the office, leaving Luriel alone with his thoughts and the ever-looming threat of disaster. He glanced at the holopad again, the lines of data like chains tying him to an anchor he couldn't see. The comm system buzzed, the AI voice cutting through his reverie. "Warden, there is an unauthorized power surge in Section 13, Luriel groaned. "Of course there is, because why let me have one uninterrupted minute of peace?" He rose from his chair, grabbing his coat. "Time to play firefighter," he muttered, heading for the door. "Let's see what our mad scientist left behind." Section 13 was a nightmare of tangled wires and sparking consoles, a monument to questionable engineering decisions. Luriel arrived to find Jax already there, crouched over a console with a face that screamed, "I am this close to strangling something." "How bad?" Luriel asked, stepping over a pile of wires that looked like they'd been arranged by a particularly sadistic cat. "Bad enough that if I didn't have trust issues with the AI, I'd be asking it for advice," Jax replied, not looking up. Helpful, Luriel said dryly, peering over Jax's shoulder. What are we dealing with? Looks like a remote activation for something, Jax said, tapping away at the console. Could be a failsafe, could be a self-destruct, you know, the usual. Right, Luriel muttered, wishing he had a cup of something stronger than coffee. Can we shut it down? Not from here, Jax answered, the frustration in his voice palpable. Too many redundancies. We'd need to get into the mainframe. Luriel nodded, feeling the pressure ratchet up another notch. Okay, let's do it, but keep it quiet. The last thing we need is a panic. As they made their way through the prison's bowels, Luriel couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The corridors seemed darker, the shadows thicker, as if the very walls were conspiring against them. Ever feel like the universe is trying to tell you something? Jax asked, his voice echoing in the narrow passageway. Yeah, Luriel replied. It's telling me to find a less stressful job, maybe something with plants. They reached the mainframe room, a vault-like space filled with humming servers and blinking lights. It was the brain of the prison, the place where everything connected, and right now it was their best shot at getting ahead of whatever scheme was brewing. Jax got to work, his fingers a blur on the keyboard. Luriel watched, feeling about as useful as a helmet in a fistfight. How's it looking? He asked, trying to keep the impatience out of his voice. Like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing, Jax replied. But I think I've found something. Good something or bad something? Luriel asked, because in his experience those were usually the only options. Depends on your perspective, Jax said, finally looking up. There's a hidden subroutine in the system. It's been quietly siphoning data and sending it off station. Luriel frowned. To where? Jax shrugged. Could be anywhere. Could be to someone's personal server, could be to a council archive. Great, Luriel sighed. Because that narrows it down to everywhere. Jax grinned, a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. But I've got a lead. Whoever set this up left a trace. We follow it, we might just find out who's pulling the strings. Luriel nodded, feeling a spark of hope amid the gloom. All right, let's track it, but keep your guard up. If someone's monitoring this, they'll know we're onto them. As they worked, the Iors slipped by, a steady march toward whatever fate awaited them. Luriel could feel the tension in the air, a storm brewing just out of sight. Finally, Jax straightened, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. Got it. The data's being routed through a satellite relay. It's an old one, barely functioning, but it's got the range to reach anywhere in the system. Can we intercept it? Luriel asked, already thinking ahead. Jax nodded. I can rig up a patch to monitor transmissions. We'll see what they're sending and maybe, just maybe, get a who and why. Good work, Luriel said, feeling the weight on his shoulders lessen slightly. Let's get this done. As they left the mainframe room, Luriel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows seemed to shift, the air heavy with anticipation. You ever get the feeling we're just cogs in some giant cosmic machine? Jax asked, his voice low. All the time, Luriel replied. But sometimes it's nice to think we're more than that. They returned to the hub of the station, where Cadden was waiting, lounging against a wall with the kind of casual ease that spoke of someone who found the world endlessly amusing. Find anything fun? Cadden asked, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Depends on your definition of fun, Luriel replied. More like a ticking time bomb with a side of betrayal. Ah, my favorite kind of party, Cadden said with a chuckle. What's the next step, fearless leader? Now we wait, Luriel said, glancing at the readout, and see if we can catch ourselves a conspirator. As they settled in for the wait, a silence fell over the room, broken only by the hum of the systems around them. Luriel felt the tension coiling inside him, a spring wound tight. You know, Cadden said, breaking the silence, for a prison this place isn't half bad. You should see some of the others. Thanks for the glowing review, Luriel replied dryly. I'll be sure to include it in the next brochure. The waiting stretched on, a void of time filled with anticipation and dread. Finally the console beeped, a flash of green that signaled a breakthrough. We've got something, Jax said, leaning forward. A transmission, heavily encrypted, but it's definitely from our mystery subroutine. L'Oreal nodded, feeling the adrenaline surge. All right, let's see what secrets it's been hiding. As Jax worked to decrypt the message, L'Oreal couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something big. The kind of big that could either save them or bring the whole system crashing down around them. Here we go, Jax announced, triumph in his voice. It's a list. Names, locations, targets, and guess what? It's tied directly to the council. Figures, L'Oreal muttered. Why settle for simple corruption when you can have grand conspiracy? Cadden leaned in, his expression thoughtful. Looks like someone's been planning a little coup. And we just stumbled into the middle of it. Great, L'Oreal said, rubbing his temples, because that's exactly what I needed right now. Think we can use this? Jax asked, his eyes hopeful. We'll have to, L'Oreal replied. It's our best shot at turning the tables, but we'll need to be careful. One wrong move and we're done. With the evidence in hand, they had a chance. A slim, perilous chance, but a chance nonetheless. And in a place like this, sometimes that was enough. For now, they'd keep moving, keep fighting, and keep hoping that the universe wasn't done playing games with them yet. Because in this grim corner of space, hope was a rare commodity, and luck was just another word for survival. The air in the mainframe room was thick with tension and the distinct odor of burning circuits. Jax was hunched over the console, fingers clattering away like an overcaffeinated pianist playing his last symphony. L'Oreal leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, watching as Jax battled with the encryption like it had personally insulted his mother. You know, if I ever get out of this place, Jax grumbled, I'm going to start a nice little hydrangea farm. No more wires, no more codes. Just me and the damn flowers. That's the spirit, L'Oreal replied, sarcasm dripping from his words like oil from a leaky engine. You can sell him to all the people who will still be alive after this place blows sky high. Jax cracked a grin, though it looked more like a grimace. Think hydrangeas are toxic. Could be a selling point. L'Oreal chuckled dryly. Probably less dangerous than this job. Anything yet? Just about, Jax replied, his eyes flitting over the screen. A little more poking and we should. His words were cut off by the sudden blare of alarms, a cacophony that could wake even the most jaded of prisoners from their stupor. The lights flickered, plunging them into a disco of panic-inducing shadows. Ah, hell, L'Oreal muttered. What now? The AI voice cut through the chaos, annoyingly calm. Warden, the prison is now on lockdown. All communication to and from the facility has been severed. Fantastic, L'Oreal said, his voice heavy with sarcasm. Just what I needed. We've been compromised, Jax said, his fingers flying over the keys. Someone's triggered a full lockdown protocol. All access is frozen. Looks like our little mole decided to make a move, L'Oreal said. You think you can override it? I can try, but it'll take time, Jax replied, sweat beading on his forehead. This isn't some rinky-dink security system. Whoever did this knows their stuff. Of course they do, L'Oreal sighed. Because nothing's ever easy, is it? The door to the mainframe room hissed open, and in strolled Cadden Sable, his expression just as infuriatingly amused as ever. What's all the ruckus? Someone set off fireworks and didn't invite me, Cadden, L'Oreal said, cutting to the chase. We've got a traitor in our midst. Any bright ideas? Cadden cocked his head, a smirk playing on his lips. Well, I did hear something interesting down in Section 12. Seems a few of the guards have been a bit too friendly with our council friends. Of course, L'Oreal deadpanned. Nothing like a little treachery to spice up a boring day. You want me to have a word, Cadden offered, that glint of mischief in his eyes. Use that silver tongue of yours, L'Oreal said. See if you can squeeze any more details out. Cadden gave a mock salute before heading out, leaving L'Oreal and Jax to stew in the flickering glow of the consoles. You really think it's the guards? Jax asked, not looking up from his work. Wouldn't surprise me, L'Oreal replied. Loyalty around here is about as solid as vapor. Jax snorted. I'd say more like a politician's promise. As Jax continued to wrestle with the lockdown, L'Oreal paced the room, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down like a lead cloak. The lockdown was bad enough, but if the guards were involved, it meant their problems were multiplying faster than they could solve them. Got something, Jax said suddenly, his voice tinged with cautious optimism. "Looks like there's a backdoor in the system. It's risky, but I might be able to get us a trickle of communication." "Do it," Luriel said, urgency in his voice. "We need to let Earth know what's going on before this whole thing goes nuclear." Jax set to work, the hum of the servers filling the silence as he worked his magic. Minutes stretched into hours, each second another reminder of how precarious their situation had become. Finally, Jax leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. "Okay, I've managed to piggyback a signal. It's weak, but it should reach a relay station." "Good work," Luriel said, clapping the technician on the shoulder. "Let's hope someone's listening." Just then, Cadden burst back into the room, his usual air of nonchalance replaced by something darker. "We've got a problem," he said, shutting the door behind him. "Just the one," Luriel replied. "Because I'm pretty sure we've got a whole laundry list." "One of the guards, Lyle," Cadden continued, ignoring the warden's sarcasm. "He's in deep with the council. I overheard him talking to someone on a secure line. They're planning to hand over the whole operation." Luriel cursed under his breath. "Any idea how far this goes?" "No clue," Cadden said, running a hand through his hair. "But if Lyle's involved, you can bet he's not the only one." "Great," Luriel muttered, "because we needed more enemies." "I can try to keep tabs on him," Cadden suggested. "See if I can figure out who else is involved." "Do it," Luriel said, "but be careful if they suspect you're onto them." Cadden flashed a grin. "Don't worry about me. I'll be as invisible as a ghost at a vampire convention." As Cadden slipped out once more, Luriel turned back to Jax. "Any luck on getting that message out?" "Just about to try," Jax replied, his fingers poised over the console. "Fingers crossed." "Let's hope this backdoor holds," Luriel said. "I don't fancy explaining to Earth why their orbital prison is now a rogue state." Jax punched in the final commands and the console hummed to life, a thin stream of data trickling out into the void. It was a gamble, one that could either save them or seal their fate. "Message sent," Jax said, leaning back with a sigh. "Now we wait." Luriel nodded, feeling the weight of their precarious situation. They were playing a dangerous game, one with stakes higher than any he'd ever faced. But for now, all they could do was wait and hope that somewhere out there, someone was listening. The hours dragged on, each second another reminder of how isolated they were. The prison was a fortress, but it was also a tomb, one that could easily become their grave if things went south. Luriel ran a hand through his hair, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles. "How long do you think we've got before they make their move?" "Hard to say," Jax replied. "But with the lockdown, we're sitting ducks. If they decide to take us out, it'll be quick." "Comforting thought," Luriel said dryly. "Remind me to send a thank you card to whoever designed this place." Jax chuckled, though it was a humorless sound. "Hey, at least we won't die from boredom." Just then the console beeped, a signal that their message had been received. It was a glimmer of hope in the darkness, a sign that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as alone as they felt. "Looks like someone heard us," Jax said, relief in his voice. "Now we just have to hope they act," Luriel replied. "Before it's too late." The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity as they waited for any sign of help. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that could drive a person mad if they let it. Finally, a message came through, a simple line of text that made Luriel's heart skip a beat. "Help is on the way. Hold tight." It was a lifeline, one that gave them a fighting chance, but they weren't out of the woods yet. Not by a long shot. "Okay," Luriel said, his voice steady. "We've got a chance. Let's make sure we're ready for whatever comes next." Jax nodded, determination in his eyes. "You got it. Let's show these bastards what we're made of." As they set to work, preparing for the coming storm, Luriel couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It was a dangerous thing, hope, but in a place like this, it was also the most valuable weapon they had. And so they waited, hearts pounding, minds racing, ready to face whatever the universe decided to throw at them next. Because in this grim corner of space, survival was the only game worth playing, and they were in it to win. The mainframe room had its own unique aroma now. something between burnt toast and desperation. Jax was still glued to his console, searching for signals like a fisherman's flailing attempts to catch something more than old boots. Luriel, meanwhile, was trying not to grind his teeth into dust as he paced back and forth, wearing a path into the dull, metallic floor. "Ever feel like a well-dressed turkey?" Luriel asked, breaking the silence with a dry chuckle. "You know, just stuffed, trussed, and ready for the next roasting." Jax gave a distracted snort. "More like roadkill if you ask me. At least turkeys get a holiday." Luriel was about to reply when the door to the mainframe room hissed open. In stepped two guards, all business, faces set like they just found out the cafeteria was out of coffee, and they were the ones who had to break it to everyone. Warden Luriel, one of them, barked, voice as pleasant as a drill sergeant with a migraine. "You're coming with us. Is that right?" Luriel said, tilting his head. "Does this involve cake?" "I could really use a slice of cake." Orders from the top, the guard insisted, ignoring the sarcasm. "You're to be taken to solitary immediately." Luriel sighed, his earlier flippancy evaporating like a puddle in a heat lamp. "Cadn't get himself captured too, or is this just me on today's special?" "Just you," the other guard replied, a flicker of sympathy crossing his face before settling back into the standard-issue mask of indifference. Luriel glanced at Jax. "Keep an eye on things. You're the brains of this operation now." "God help us all," Jax muttered, nodding. "I'll keep the seat warm for you." "Much appreciated," Luriel said, allowing the guards to lead him away. "If there's a revolution, save me a pitchfork." As they marched down the corridor, the weight of the situation settled in. It was a walk he'd made 1,000 times, but this time it felt different. Final, almost. He was escorted through winding passages, each more drab and lifeless than the last, until they reached the door to solitary confinement. The door creaked open, revealing a chamber as welcoming as a coffin. No comfort, no companions, just the cold steel of solitude. Luriel stepped inside with a resigned sigh, the door clanging shut behind him like the sound of inevitability. He sat on the hard bench, running a hand through his hair. It felt like a bad day had somehow managed to get worse, if that was even possible. "Well," he said to the empty room, "looks like I'm my own best company now." But the silence didn't last long. A tinny voice crackled through a hidden speaker, its tone as warm as a snake's smile. "Warden Luriel, or should I say former warden?" "Oh, fantastic," Luriel drawled. "Voices in my head. Just what I needed." "Let's skip the pleasantries," the voice continued, dripping with condescension. "You're aware of the cloning operation?" "Yes." "Hard to miss," Luriel replied. "It's the only thing around here that could rival the mess at my desk." The voice paused, considering. "Do you understand the implications of what you've stumbled upon?" "Sure," Luriel said, rolling his eyes. "Illegal, unethical, and one hell of a power drain. The trifecta of poor decisions. But the real issue," the voice purred, "is what this operation means for you. If we succeed, the balance of power shifts. The council becomes obsolete. And you're just a loose end, loose end." Two words that never bode well for anyone, especially when spoken by a disembodied voice in a dark room. "I do love a good retirement plan," Luriel quipped. "Really. Just not sure how I feel about being part of it." "I suggest you get comfortable, Warden," the voice replied, ignoring his sarcasm. "You'll be here for a while." The voice cut off, leaving Luriel with his thoughts. He was trapped, and now he knew exactly what was at stake. A power grab that could turn the galaxy on its head, and he was sitting in the way like a particularly stubborn roadblock. Back in the mainframe room, Jax was doing his best to keep the operation afloat on a sea of chaos. He'd managed to keep the relay signal open, but the strain of maintaining it was evident in the sweat dripping down his brow. Meanwhile, Cadden was prowling the corridors like a cat on the hunt, weaving between shadows and eavesdropping on conversations with an ease born of necessity. He'd always been good at slipping in and out of places unnoticed, and now that skill was more crucial than ever. He paused at a corner, listening as two guards passed by, voices low and urgent. Did you hear? Luriel's been taken to solitary. They've finally moved against him. Cadden resisted the urge to punch the wall. He'd known this day was coming, but it didn't make the news any easier to swallow. Luriel was one of the few people he trusted, and now he was locked up while the conspiracy unfolded around them like a bad soap opera. Guess it's up to me then, he muttered to himself, adjusting his jacket. Time to be the hero nobody asked for. Again, he continued his circuit, ears open for any hint of how deeply the corruption ran. It was a dangerous game, but he'd been playing it for long enough to know the stakes. And besides, if he didn't do something, who would? Back in his cell, Luriel was exploring the limits of his confinement. He'd counted the tiles on the ceiling twice, memorized the sound of distant alarms, and tried, unsuccessfully, to make shadow puppets against the wall. He'd almost decided that talking to himself was the next logical step when the door clanged open once more. A guard stood there, looking more nervous than a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. "You've got a visitor." "Visitor?" Luriel arched a brow. "Didn't know I was so popular." The guard said nothing, simply stepping aside to reveal Cadden, who slipped in with an exaggerated flourish. "Miss me?" "Like a toothache," Luriel replied, relief masked by sarcasm. "How'd you manage to get in here?" "Pulled a few strings, flashed a few smiles," Cadden said, shrugging. "You know how it is." "Sure," Luriel said dryly. "Because that always works for me." "Listen," Cadden said, dropping the act, "I've got a plan, but it's risky." "Risky's my middle name," Luriel replied, a wry smile playing at his lips. "What's the scheme?" Cadden leaned in, voice low. "We've got to expose the whole operation. Blow it wide open. But first we need to get you out of here." "Easy peasy," Luriel said, nodding. "Just unlock the door and I'll walk right out." "What could go wrong?" Cadden chuckled, but it was a hollow sound. "I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. Just sit tight until the signal." Luriel asked, curious despite himself. "You'll know it when you see it," Cadden assured him. "Trust me." Luriel hesitated, then nodded. "All right. I'll be ready. But you'd better not leave me in here to rot, or I'll haunt you till the end of time." Cadden grinned, standing. "Wouldn't dream of it." With that he was gone, leaving Luriel alone once more with his thoughts, though this time they were tinged with a flicker of hope. It was a dangerous thing, but if anyone could pull off the impossible, it was Cadden. Back in the mainframe room, Jax was busy juggling 1,000 tasks at once. He'd managed to keep the communication channels open, but the challenge was keeping it under the radar. Every beep and buzz sent a jolt of adrenaline through him, each one a potential signal that they'd been discovered. His focus was so intense that he almost didn't notice when a message flashed on the screen. "Cadden's in position. Prepare for distraction." Jax grinned, a rare glimmer of excitement lighting up his features. He ran his fingers over the console, preparing for whatever chaos was about to ensue. Meanwhile, Cadden was setting the stage for their grand escape, moving through the corridors with a confidence that belied the storm raging inside him. He'd always thrived under pressure, and today was no different. He reached the main security hub, ducking inside with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. The room was a tangle of wires and screens, a techno-jungle that would have made any IT specialist weak at the knees. He moved to the control panel, fingers flying over the keys. It was a delicate dance. One wrong move and the whole thing could come crashing down around them. But he wasn't worried. Not yet, anyway. Back in solitary, Luriel was counting the seconds, each one a tick closer to whatever Cadden had planned. He trusted Cadden with his life, but that didn't make the waiting any easier. Then it happened. A low rumble growing louder like thunder heralding a coming storm. The lights flickered, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, everything held its breath. And then all hell broke loose. Alarms blared, loud enough to wake the dead, and the door to Luriel's cell swung open, inviting him back into the chaos. He didn't hesitate, stepping out into the madness with a sense of purpose. "About time," he said to himself, moving down the corridor with determination. He didn't know what awaited him, but he was ready to face it head-on. Back in the mainframe room, Jax was whooping with glee, dancing a jig as the system went haywire. Hell of a signal. He shouted to the empty room, his voice lost amidst the alarms. Cadden was racing through the facility, heart pounding as he navigated the chaos he'd unleashed. He had no doubt that security would be hot on their heels, but for now, they had the upper hand. He reached the rendezvous point just as Lurail came barreling around the corner, the two of them skidding to a halt in a perfect two-person collision. "Fancy meeting you here," Lurail said, grinning like a madman. "Never doubted you'd show," Cadden replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "Let's get the hell out of here." Together, they moved through the pandemonium, a whirlwind of motion and chaos, driven by the shared determination to see this through to the end. As they reached the exit, Cadden glanced back, his gaze lingering on the prison that had been their world for so long. "Think we'll miss this place?" Like a hole in the head, Lurail replied, his voice full of dark humor. With that, they stepped out into the unknown, leaving the madness behind them. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time in what felt like forever, they had a chance. And sometimes, a chance was all you needed. The prison's corridors were a cacophony of chaos, alarms shrieking like banshees on caffeine, lights flickering as if someone had forgotten to pay the electric bill. Lurail and Cadden charged down the hallway with the urgency of two men who'd just noticed a buy-one-get-one free sale on freedom. Cadden took the lead, navigating through the labyrinth with a speed that suggested either desperation or the promise of a very large drink at the end of this mess. "I swear, if this keeps up, I'm going to start charging for guided tours," he quipped over his shoulder. "Just try not to get us lost," Lurail shot back, ducking under a low-hanging pipe that seemed hell-bent on knocking him out. "I'd hate for our dramatic escape to turn into a comedy show." They skidded to a halt at a junction where 3 guards stood. Well, 2 stood and 1 leaned against the wall, looking like he'd already decided to take the rest of the day off. Lurail and Cadden exchanged a look that said "after you," and then launched into action. Lurail lunged, using his shoulder like a battering ram. The guard he tackled went down with the grace of a sack of potatoes, which was just as well since his weapon clattered away harmlessly. Cadden, meanwhile, ducked and weaved, punching and jabbing with the enthusiasm of a man who had something to prove. Or maybe he just really hated Mondays. "Thanks for the workout," Lurail huffed as the last guard hit the floor, out cold. "I was beginning to think I'd have to start running laps around solitary for exercise." "Always happy to help with your cardio," Cadden replied, dusting off his hands. "Now let's find some more friends." They continued down the corridor, rallying the prisoners as they went. Each cell they passed added another ally to their cause, a ragtag group of disillusioned inmates eager for a taste of rebellion. It was like herding cats, if the cats had spent the last few years plotting the downfall of their captors. "What's the plan?" a burly prisoner with a beard that could rival a small forest asked as they gathered in a dank, dimly lit common area. "Simple," Lurail said, with a grin that was decidedly more manic than reassuring. "Create enough chaos to make the Galactic Council sit up and take notice. Blow the lid off this whole operation." "Chaos, huh?" the prisoner chuckled, cracking his knuckles. "Sounds like my kind of party." Cadden stepped forward, raising his voice to be heard over the murmurs of the growing crowd. "We're not just breaking out, we're breaking the system. There's a cloning operation funding half this prison, and it's time we put a stop to it." He paused for effect, looking each prisoner in the eye. "We've got skills, we've got numbers, and most importantly, we've got nothing left to lose." There was a collective murmur of agreement, the kind of grim determination that only comes from people who've had their backs against the wall for far too long. They were ready to fight, to risk everything for a sliver of hope. "First, we need to take control of the command center," Lurail said, outlining the plan. "Jax is holding things together by a thread, but we need to give him some breathing room." "Jax," a voice piped up from the back. "That the guy who smells like he bathes in coffee." "That's the one," Cadden confirmed with a nod. "He's our inside man. We cover him, he keeps the system in our favor." The plan was set, and as the ragtag group moved through the corridors, the prison seemed to pulse with barely contained energy. It was a dangerous, volatile mix, but it was theirs. Meanwhile, in the mainframe room, Jax was juggling tasks like a circus performer on a sugar high. He'd managed to keep the system in a state of controlled anarchy, but there was only so much one man could do against the tide. "I need a vacation," he muttered, fingers dancing over the console. The door burst open, admitting Luriel, Cadden, and their new entourage. "Hope you saved us a seat," Luriel said, clapping Jax on the back with more force than was strictly necessary. "Glad you could make it to the party," Jax replied, his tone dry enough to rival the Sahara. "You brought friends." "Everyone loves a good revolution," Cadden said with a wink. "Now what do you need from us?" Jax gestured to the console, currently displaying a dizzying array of data. "We need to send a signal to the council, something they can't ignore, but the system's more tangled than a politician's alibi." "Good thing we've got more hands on deck," Luriel said. He turned to the group. "I need a volunteer who knows how to handle these wires." A wiry woman stepped forward, all sharp angles and sharper eyes. "I'm your girl," she said, pushing up her sleeves. "Name's Vex." Vex moved to the console, her fingers flying over the keyboard with practiced ease. "Jax, keep them distracted," she ordered, her tone brooking no argument. "I'll handle the signal." As she worked, the room grew tense, the kind of silence that comes when everyone's waiting for the other shoe to drop. Luriel stood by the door, eyes scanning for threats, while Cadden watched over Vex's shoulder, ready to jump in if needed. "Almost there," Vex muttered, a bead of sweat rolling down her temple. "Just a little more." The console beeped, and the screen flared with a new message: "Signal sent." A cheer went up from the group, the first sign that maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. "Now we just have to hold the line," Jax said, though his expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "We'll hold," Luriel promised, his voice steady. "We've come too far to back down now." As the prisoners fortified their positions, the atmosphere shifted from one of desperation to one of determination. They were done being pawns in someone else's game. The Iors crawled by, each one heavier than the last. The air was thick with tension, but also something else: hope. They'd taken the first step, and now all they could do was wait for the council's response. And wait they did, nerves taut as wires ready to snap. They listened for the telltale hum of incoming ships, the distant rumble of engines that would signal the arrival of change. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sound came, a low, thrumming vibration that shivered through the walls, growing louder and more insistent. Luriel exchanged a glance with Cadden, both knowing this was the moment they'd been building towards. "Ready to meet our guests?" Cadden asked, his grin equal parts excitement and trepidation. "Never been more ready," Luriel replied, his voice carrying the weight of his resolve. "Let's give them a show they won't forget." As the ships docked, the prisoners prepared to make their stand, united in their cause. It was time to face the music, and they planned to be anything but a one-hit wonder. The doors to the command center slid open with a hiss, admitting the first of the council's team. They were a motley crew, all sharp suits and sharper expressions, their eyes taking in the scene with cool detachment. "Looks like you've been busy," the leader remarked, his tone as dry as a desert. "Had to do something with all the free time," Luriel said, crossing his arms and meeting the leader's gaze with unflinching defiance. The leader glanced at the command console where Vex and Jax were still hard at work. "You sent a signal," he stated, more accusation than observation. "We did," Cadden confirmed, stepping forward. "This prison is more than it seems. It's time the council saw the truth." The leader arched an eyebrow, unimpressed. "And you think this little rebellion will make a difference?" Luriel chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. "We're betting on it." The leader studied them for a long moment, his expression inscrutable. Then he nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. "Very well. We'll see what the council has to say." As the team moved to take control of the facility, the prisoners watched with a mix of anticipation and dread. They'd set the wheels in motion, and now all that remained was to see where they would take them. In the meantime, Luriel, Cadden, and their allies stood together, united in their cause. They'd faced the abyss, and while the outcome was still uncertain, one thing was clear. They were ready to fight for their freedom, no matter the cost. And sometimes that was all it took to change the universe. The tension in the room was as thick as the sludge that passed for food in the orbital megaprison. Vex's fingers were still moving over the console like a pianist at a concerto for the doomed. She'd sent out the signal, and now it was just a waiting game. But of course, patience was a luxury none of them could afford. The council's team, all dressed like they'd just left a funeral where they'd also been the cause of death, hovered at the edges, watching with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for forensic accountants. Jax was practically growing a new skin made of sweat, his eyes darting from the flashing screens to the stony faces of their uninvited guests. "Remind me, Luriel," he muttered under his breath. "Why didn't we just go with the plan where I fake my own death and live a quiet life as a hermit?" "Because you'd make a terrible hermit," Luriel replied, not looking away from the council leader. "All that time alone, you'd probably end up talking to yourself and realizing you're just not that interesting." Cadden stood by, arms crossed, exuding the kind of confidence that usually got people into trouble or out of it, depending on the day. "Relax, Jax. If things go south, we'll just do what we always do. Run screaming into the void," Jax quipped, his voice a strained whisper. "Exactly," Cadden said with a grin. "Plan B, Chaos and Mayhem Edition." The council leader stepped forward, the kind of man who looked like he ironed his socks just for fun. "Your little stunt may have got our attention, but don't mistake that for mercy." "We're not mistaking anything," Luriel shot back, his voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. "We're simply pointing out that what you've been up to here is less upstanding governance and more intergalactic crime syndicate." The leader's eyes flicked to the console where Vex was still working her magic. "And you think broadcasting this will make a difference?" Cadden leaned in, his voice low and dangerous. "Oh, it will. Because the universe loves a scandal almost as much as it loves a hero. Don't we all?" Vex added, not bothering to look up from her work. "Besides," Luriel continued, "we're not asking for a change of heart, just a change in management. Preferably one that doesn't involve clone armies and corrupt officials." The council's team exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that said more than words ever could. Their leader, though, wasn't about to be swayed by rhetoric alone. His expression remained as impassive as ever, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, maybe doubt, maybe indigestion. "We're not here to debate ethics," he said finally. "We're here to restore order. And by restore order, you mean sweep this under the rug and hope no one notices, right?" Jax interjected, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The leader's gaze snapped to Jax, but before he could retort, the console let out a series of urgent beeps. Vex straightened, her face a mask of determination. "We've got an incoming transmission. It's being broadcast on all frequencies." The tension ratcheted up a notch, if that was even possible. The council team shifted uneasily, while the prisoners all seemed to hold their breaths as one. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for, the moment that would decide their fate. On the screen, the image flickered to life, displaying a live feed of a galactic news network anchor, his face the picture of professional concern. "Breaking news," he began. "An unprecedented situation is unfolding at the orbital megaprison, where allegations of illegal cloning and council corruption have been brought to light. We go live to our correspondent on the scene." The feed cut to a shaky camera view of ships docking at the prison, the chaos barely contained but oh so visible. The prisoners erupted into cheers, a sound that was equal parts relief and defiance. They'd done it. They'd actually bloody done it. The council leader's face was a mask of barely contained fury. "You think you've won? This isn't over." "No," Luriel agreed, his voice steady and strong. "It's just beginning." Cadden chuckled, his laughter a dark melody in the tense room. "You know, I always said if we were gonna go out, we might as well go out with a bang. Looks like we're not going out after all." We're rewriting the script, Jax added, finally relaxing as he plopped into a chair, ignoring the glares from the council's suits. And this time we get the happy ending. Happy ending might be pushing it, Vex said, wiping her brow. But I'll settle for an ending where we don't all end up as lab rats or worse. The council leader opened his mouth, probably to issue some threat or another, but before he could, the mainframe room speakers crackled to life. The AI spoke, its voice robotic yet somehow laced with amusement. Attention! Incoming message from Galactic Council. Command requested for immediate cessation of all unauthorized activities. Sanctions to be lifted pending further investigation. And just like that, the tide turned. The council's grip on the prison slackened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the prisoners could breathe a little easier. Lurael exchanged a glance with Cadden, their silent communication one of relief and triumph. "Looks like we bought ourselves a little time," Lurael said. "And maybe a little justice," Cadden added, his grin as sharp as ever. Jax, ever the pragmatist, raised an eyebrow. "So, what's next? We get medals or just a pat on the back?" "Don't get ahead of yourself," Lurael cautioned, though he couldn't help but smile. "There's still a lot of work to do. But at least," Cadden pointed out, "we're doing it on our own terms." As the prisoners began to disperse, each with renewed purpose, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't quite the end of the story, but it was one hell of a new chapter. The council team, realizing their position was untenable, began organizing their retreat. The leader, however, paused, casting a long look at Lurael and his group. "Don't think this means you're off the hook," he warned. Lurael shrugged, his expression one of defiant nonchalance. "We're all on a hook one way or another, but at least we're not dangling alone." The leader's lips twitched, perhaps the closest he'd ever come to a smile. "I'll be seeing you," he said, the words carrying both a promise and a threat. "We'll keep the light on for you," Cadden replied, his tone mocking but his eyes serious. With that, the council team filed out, leaving the prisoners in charge of their own fates. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was a start. As the dust settled, Lurael turned to his friends, his partners in this mad escapade. "Well," he said, clapping Jax on the back, "looks like you won't have to fake your death after all." "Shame," Jax replied, his humor returning. "I had a whole backstory planned about being a misunderstood artist." "And what would you paint?" Vex asked, her curiosity piqued. "Probably just a lot of black," Jax admitted. "It's how I feel most days." Lurael laughed, the sound a rare and welcome relief. "I think we all do, but maybe, just maybe, we can add a little color back into this place." Cadden nodded, his gaze sweeping over the room. "We'll see this through, because if we don't, who will?" The others murmured their agreement, the bonds forged in adversity stronger than any iron chain. They'd taken the first step toward something better, and while the road ahead was uncertain, they were ready to walk it together. As the prisoners began to organize themselves, ready to face whatever came next, the sense of possibility hung in the air. They'd toppled giants and survived the fallout, and now it was time to rebuild from the ashes. Lurael, Cadden, Jax, and Vex stood together, a ragtag band of misfits who dared to defy the odds. They'd faced death and despair, but they'd also found hope and camaraderie in the unlikeliest of places. And sometimes, in the darkest corners of the universe, that was enough to change everything. Lurael leaned back in his chair, the kind of chair that threatens to dump you on the floor if you make any sudden movements. The command room of the orbital megaprison was buzzing, not like a productive hive, but more like a wasp nest that someone had just whacked with a stick. The council's team had made their exit, leaving behind the lingering smell of self-importance and existential dread. "So, new head of the prison, huh?" Cadden drawled, leaning against the wall with a casualness that belied the chaos they'd just navigated. "How does it feel to go from inmate to warden?" Lurael shrugged, trying to mask his surprise with a nonchalance that might have been more convincing if his heart wasn't still pounding like a bass line at a techno funeral. "You know what they say about glass ceilings. Sometimes you gotta shoot your way through." Jax snorted from his console, finally relaxing into the kind of slouch that screamed overworked technician at the end of a double shift. And they say crime doesn't pay. Well, it doesn't pay much, Luriel admitted, tapping a stack of forms that had already begun to accumulate on his desk. But it pays in other ways. Like not getting vaporized by corrupt officials. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, from the sharp edge of crisis to the dull throb of bureaucracy. Prisoners shuffled about with the kind of grim determination usually reserved for people who've just realized they're out of toilet paper after using the bathroom. Vex, ever the pragmatist, sorted through a pile of equipment salvaged from the now-defunct cloning operation. "Think they'll actually lift those sanctions?" Vex asked, not looking up from the tangled mess of wires and gadgets that had formerly been illegal as hell. "Let's hope so," Luriel replied, glancing at the holopad that was already demanding his attention. "We've got enough problems without the whole starving-to-death thing looming over us. You'd think a place like this would be better stocked," Cadden opined, inspecting a dented can of something that might have been beans or paint. "Not even a decent bottle of synthale to celebrate with." Jax laughed, a short, barking sound. "Celebrate what? That we're still breathing. That's a pretty low bar." "Hey," Luriel interjected, pointing a finger at Jax, "breathing's a luxury around here, especially with the air quality being what it is. Ever wonder why it smells like a burnt sandwich everywhere?" Cadden chuckled, tossing the can back into the box. "Guess we can't have everything, but we do have a shot at something resembling freedom. Or whatever passes for it in this corner of the galaxy." "Speaking of freedom," Luriel said, turning his attention to a blinking message on the holopad. "Looks like the Council has decided to give you a pardon, Cadden, along with a one-way ticket to Earth." Cadden's grin faltered for a moment, replaced by something like genuine surprise. "Earth, huh? I hear it's the place to be if you like gravity and whether that doesn't try to kill you. Never thought I'd see the day," Jax muttered. "You on Earth, sipping cocktails on a beach instead of running scams in space." "Don't get too excited," Cadden shot back. "I might just come back. I've got a reputation to uphold." "Uphold or tear down?" Vex asked with a smirk. Cadden shrugged, his expression a mask of insouciance. "Depends on the day." The room settled into a comfortable chaos, the kind that spoke of things breaking but not quite broken. The kind that suggested possibilities if you squinted hard enough and ignored the pervasive smell of desperation and recycled air. "All right," Luriel announced, clapping his hands together. "Let's get to work. We've got a lot of cleaning up to do, both literal and metaphorical. And I need more coffee if we're going to tackle this mountain of paperwork. Don't forget the rats," Jax added, his tone only half joking. "They might be the real ones in charge around here. If they start to unionize, we're in trouble," Vex quipped, finally looking up from her task with a smirk. Luriel sighed, though it was more theatrical than genuine. "Great. Add rat negotiations to the list of things I didn't sign up for." "Welcome to management," Cadden said dryly. "It's like herding cats. Angry, semi-sentient, possibly mutant cats." Luriel shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips despite himself. "Well, at least I've got you lot to help me." The group settled into a rhythm, the kind that came from shared hardship and victory. They all moved with purpose, even if that purpose was slightly obscured by the reality of their situation. Somewhere in the mess of it all, the realization hit Luriel. They'd done something incredible, not just survived but transformed. The prison, once a symbol of oppression, was now a canvas for change. And he was the reluctant artist, paintbrush in hand, tasked with adding color to the drab canvas of steel and solitude. As he watched his friends work, their banter filling the space between the clatter of machinery and the hum of electronics, he knew they were on the right path. Not the easy one, but the one worth taking. "All right, let's get to it," Luriel declared, his voice cutting through the chatter like a well-honed knife. "We've got a prison to run and a future to build. And if we're lucky, maybe even a little peace to find." The others nodded, their gazes meeting his with a mix of determination and solidarity. It was a small moment, but it felt significant, a promise made in the quiet chaos of a room that had seen too much. With a final nod, Luriel turned to his work, a sense of purpose settling over him like a well-worn cloak. The road ahead was daunting, but it was theirs to walk together, one step at a time. As the clamor of activity resumed, a new kind of order emerged from the chaos, fragile but real. And for the first time in a long time, Luriel felt something he hadn't dared to in years: hope. The day wore on, the hours slipping by in a blur of tasks and decisions. In the mainframe room, the faint scent of burnt toast still lingered, but there was something else too. A sense of change, of new beginnings. From his vantage point, Luriel watched as the prisoners, no former prisoners, went about their work. They moved with a purpose, their actions fueled by a newfound sense of agency. There was laughter, too, mingled with the hum of machinery and the clatter of tools. It was a sound that had been absent for so long, now filling the space between the walls like a bomb. He allowed himself a small smile, the kind that wasn't quite ready to surface fully but was there nonetheless. From the corner of his eye, he saw Jax and Vex deep in conversation, their heads bent over a console that had seen better days. Cadden was nearby, doing what he did best, charming his way through yet another impossible situation. "You're really going to Earth?" Jax asked, his voice carrying over the clamor. "That's the plan," Cadden replied, flashing his trademark grin. "Gonna see what all the fuss is about. Think you'll miss the prison life?" Vex chimed in, a teasing lilt to her voice. "Not the food, that's for sure," Cadden shot back, then added more seriously, "but maybe a bit. It's strange, isn't it, how a place like this can start to feel like home?" "Yeah," Jax agreed, looking thoughtful. "Stranger things have happened." They lapsed into silence, the kind that was companionable rather than awkward, the kind that suggested words weren't always necessary. Luriel turned his attention back to the holopad, the flickering displays a reminder of the work yet to be done. There were decisions to make, plans to formulate, alliances to forge. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. They'd achieved something remarkable, and that was worth savoring. As the day shifted into evening, the light outside the narrow windows softened, casting long shadows across the floor. The atmosphere in the command room was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos of earlier. Luriel pushed back his chair, the legs scraping against the metal floor with a sound that echoed in the quiet. He stood, stretching the stiffness from his muscles, then made his way toward the center of the room where his friends were gathered. "All right," he said, clapping his hands together to get their attention. "Let's wrap this up for today. We've got a lot to tackle tomorrow." The others nodded, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. Jax powered down his console while Vex secured the equipment, her movements precise and efficient. Cadden approached, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "So, Luriel, now that you're in charge, do we get weekends off?" Luriel chuckled, shaking his head. "You wish. We're on the clock until further notice." "Figures," Cadden replied, though there was no real heat behind the words. "Guess I'll have to save my vacation for Earth then." As they prepared to leave for the night, Luriel took one last look around the room. It was still the same in many ways, cold, sterile, utilitarian. But it was also different, imbued with the warmth of shared purpose and camaraderie. He knew they had a long road ahead, filled with challenges and setbacks, but they'd faced worse and emerged stronger for it. And now, with the promise of reform on the horizon, they had the chance to make a real difference. The others began to file out, their voices a low murmur of conversation. Luriel lingered for a moment, watching them go, feeling a sense of pride swell within him. They'd done the impossible, and now they had the opportunity to build something new from the ashes of the old. "Hey," Cadden called from the doorway, waiting for him. "You coming?" Luriel nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, but not as a burden, more like an old friend, familiar and steadfast. "Yeah," he replied, joining them. "I'm coming." As they stepped out into the corridor, the dim lights casting a warm glow over their path, Luriel felt the faint stirrings of hope, not just for himself, but for all of them. They dared to dream of something better, and in doing so, they'd taken the first steps toward making it a reality. And sometimes, in the darkest corners of the universe, hope was enough to light the way forward.